Hello and welcome back to the Not the Old Firm YouTube channel. My name is Ben Banks, back to preview a massive game for Scotland, a once in a lifetime game really if you look at between the last playoff games, the last time we were in a major tournament, these games don't come around very often. It was 2003 in the Bertie Vogts era. Scotland last took place in a playoff game for a major tournament, 2020, and we have our next one as Scotland look to qualify for its first major tournament since 1998 against Serbia and Belgrade tomorrow in a Euro 2020 playoff final. Me and James Black will preview the game. It's obviously going to be a massive one for the country. Obviously, perhaps the occasion itself is slightly dampened by the fact that there's no fans involved. You'd like to think Scotland would probably bring tens of thousands over to Serbia, given the magnitude of the game, but not to be in the current climate. And we'll look ahead to all the different permutations of this game, as well as hearing from a current Scotland international that's away with the squad. What are you feeling ahead of this one, James?
Can I be the party pooper?
I'm shocked. Why is that?
Genuinely expecting Scotland to get badly turned over here.
Wow. So about a minute into this video.
Serbia's a huge step up from the likes of Israel. I mean, you're looking at guys like Milinkovic-Savic, Dusan Tadic, some really, really good players. The annoying thing is, on paper, Scotland should have everything about them to at least match Serbia. Because I think when you compare the two squads on paper, they are fairly similar. But when you look at how Scotland have performed recently against far weaker sides, they're kind of scraping over the top against the likes of Israel, who are, with the greatest respect, and they're a couple of levels below where Scotland should be.
One thing I would say is that the style of play Steve Clarke is, it's a bit like Kilmarnock. They play pretty much the same as they do. Like Kilmarnock, Steve Clarke played the same against Ross County as they play against Rangers. They would play the exact same. You wouldn't say their performance was any better or worse, but the results were all still the same. And I feel like that's the case with Scotland, that whether they play Israel or whether they play Serbia, the performance level is always going to be the same, and a lot of the time it's going to be a similar outcome. I don't think it's going to be this big shootout or anything. I think it's going to be a pretty awful game to watch, if I'm being honest. But in terms, I think it'll be tight.
I would disagree slightly on the Kilmarnock point, just in that I do think Kilmarnock would tend to kind of up their game against Rangers and Celtic. I do think we would kind of see players would run that wee bit further and jump that wee bit higher than they would if it was a game against Livingston, let's say, Ross County. And I expect that's going to happen for Scotland as well in Belgrade. It's the biggest game for many of these players probably will ever play in, if I'm being honest. If Scotland lose this one, this will probably be the biggest game in a lot of these guys' careers. But it's maybe 20 odd years of watching Scotland fail gloriously, of more than that actually. Glorious failure was a thing even when we were qualifying for tournaments. So it's maybe just that kind of natural cynicism that I've kind of got built in, but I don't, even the bookies have got Serbia to run away with this. I think I've seen the odds have been something like 2-5 for Serbia to win, which says a lot. That doesn't bode well for Scotland at all. I mean, and if they do it, it will be fantastic if they can actually qualify. But
well, one person who shares confidence about a Scottish result over in Serbia is Declan Gallagher, Mull defender who's performed very well at international level, especially in the last 3 games, shining alongside Scott McTominay and Andy Considine.
Shining, Ben. The Scotland defence in the last 3 games, Sean. Are we really going down that one?
We are going down that route. They kept 3 clean sheets, so you can't say anything about it. But he's looking forward to the game, and he's confident, despite the fact he's going to be going up against players from the Premier League and Real Madrid.
Yeah, well, obviously meeting up with the squad tomorrow. Obviously, we've got the night to ourselves, our family, so we'll meet up with the squad tomorrow, get our testing and stuff like that done, and then get prepared for Serbia.
How are you feeling about it?
Confident. Obviously, we've been on a good run. I think that's 8 games unbeaten, so we have to go into this game with full confidence. There's no point in sitting back and being nervous and dwelling on it. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity for somebody, so we have to give it a all. Yeah, definitely. I think obviously keeping 3 clean sheets in the 3 games in the last camp now was massive, and it's obviously gave us something to build on. So hopefully we can do the same again in Serbia, keep a clean sheet and get the. I think they've obviously got world-class players, so it's going to be a really tough game, and obviously we're playing them in Serbia, which makes even that a little bit more tougher. But end of the day, we've got a really good team. We know what we want to do, and hopefully that we'll have a game plan ready for Serbia, and hopefully we can stick to that and win the game.
You also had the top-class opponents today, but then Mitrovic on Thursday doesn't get any easier for you.
No, obviously playing against a £5 million player, and then Edward comes off the bench as well, so it's no great. And then new telling him the next game's Mitrovic, who plays for Fulham in the Prem, and obviously Jovic that's at Real Madrid. It's not getting very much easier, but these are the games that you live for, and these are the games that you want to play in, especially a player that's playing for Motherwell. We don't get the chance very often, so it's one that I'm looking for. Obviously I can remember wee bits and pieces. I can't remember too much. I can't actually remember last week, but
Where were you 98?
I don't even know.
When were you born?
1991, so 7, so as I say, I can't even remember last week, but no, obviously it's something that the nations look forward to. The nation wants Scotland to be in a major tournament, we want to be in a major tournament, so we have to go there believing that we can get there, and obviously everything that we do is obviously fully funded.
Well, I thought the defence was actually perhaps the best part of Scotland's performances in the last, probably just under Steve Clarke. Well, maybe not so much in the early part of it. Scotland did go in a sort of a transition phase, obviously burning out still from the Alex McLeish era, but especially maybe in the last year, I don't think you can say a bad word about anybody that stepped into that Scotland defence.
Right, and this isn't just you. I've noticed it elsewhere, but we're now getting to the point where we're starting to rewrite history.
How's that?
What was the reaction to the 3-5-2 after the first game of the last international?
Oh, aye, it was completely and utterly berated, but at the same
and in particular the defence were berated.
At the same time, I think people could see that it was some sort of building block to it, and again, they didn't exactly go and concede 3 or 4 goals. I think it has been a work in progress. That thing, I don't think it's always been perfect, but I think in the last 3 games you can see that Steve Clarke's had to sort of go through. He's known what he's wanted of this defence. I think he's got fairly solid performances, but nothing complete. In those last 3 games, it got the defence to a point where they were solid. They knew your job, and I think Scott McTominay is the biggest example of that. I mean, he was widely slated after these September games, called all sorts, bomb scare, all these different things should be dropped for the squad immediately. But then in October, you have a couple of dropouts. Kieran Tierney, Scott McTominay goes back into defence, Andy Considine comes in, and now all of a sudden you're looking at the likes of Leeds United captain Liam Cooper, Kieran Tierney, Nottingham Forest defender Scott McKenna not being able to get into that defence because of how well they played last time.
I mean, that's a thing in itself. When it comes to the defence, are we now going to see Steve Clarke make the big mistake that he made last time, or sorry, the one before in September, and absolutely shoehorn both Kieran Tierney and Andy Robertson into that side, because we've seen several times that it just does not work.
Yeah, I think it would be very unfair on the players who played last time who actually got, and I know you should be trying to get your best 11 players on the park, especially in a game like this. We also need to make sure it's a system that works, and I think it would be very unfair on those players who did get Scotland this far to just be bombed out of the squad. I think Andy Considine especially has more than earned his place in this squad, as well as Declan Gallagher.
There's a few positions where the same argument can be made as well. I've seen a fair bit of chat that Craig Gordon will probably start in goals. Did I miss something?
Yeah, David Marshall's been one of the best Scotland players in the last year for me.
John McLaughlin.
David Marshall for me is one of them. David Marshall, you wouldn't say.
I'll completely agree with you on Marshall, but I mean, even in terms of the hierarchy of that squad just now, if we're going on performances, let's take Marshall as being the number one. And John McLaughlin's got 8 clean sheets in 9 Premiership games this season.
The good thing is,
Craig Gordon made 1 good save against Hibs.
the good thing is, well, to be fair, I'll give Craig Gordon a bit more credit. I think he's been an absolute game changer for Hearts, and some would argue probably.
They've been playing our bro.
Still, but I mean,
no. There's not no, because we're not talking that he's playing. Let's say he'd still been at Celtic, right? And he'd been playing Champions League football, Europa League football, he'd been playing the Premiership, and he'd been playing regularly. And he'd been making important saves at big moments. Absolutely. There'd be a really strong case to go, he deserves to come back into the squad and maybe even back into the side. Just now he's playing Arbroath, he's playing Dundee, he's playing East Fife. Oh, come on.
I think everybody knows that Craig Gordon, even if he is third choice,
He's probably going to start.
I'd be very surprised if Craig Gordon started.
I wouldn't. Between Gordon and Marshall.
I think it is, I must admit, I think it is between Gordon and Marshall. I can't see John McLaughlin starting, but I think David Marshall is the okay. I think Kenny McLean made an interesting observation. Since David Marshall sort of came back in, it's not so much he's been making 4 or 5 standout saves every game. It just gives the back line a bit of confidence that things aren't going to go awry. I mean, we've seen, with all due respect to them, we've seen...
Tell that to his Derby teammate.
I mean, I know, especially at Wigan last year, like, Wigan fans were like, where's this David Marshall in the domestic scene? But I mean, Scotland fans don't matter about that. He's been brilliant for Scotland, so I mean, it doesn't matter.
Is that not what Steve Clarke insists that he picks his squad on? If you're not playing, you're not performing for your club, you're not going to get into the side.
Aye, but I think you need to give exception. If David Marshall's played well for Scotland over the last year, what's the reason he dropped him?
Because he's not playing well for his club. Playing well for Scotland in September doesn't negate what he's done in October.
I know, but he's played well for Scotland for the past year. I think he's solid.
But this is why Scotland have failed for far too long. Let's ignore how this guy's been shite for his club for 6 weeks. And I'm not saying that Marshall necessarily has, but there's been lots of examples of guys over the last 20 years where they've been awful, or they've not been playing, or, there's been something where you're like, how is this guy even in the squad? And they're getting picked on the basis, well, remember when we played Estonia 8 months ago, he had a great 25 minutes in that game. And it's like, but he's been terrible at club level. That's what should be dominating the reason making him getting to the side. And I go back to the Tierney Robertson thing. The Tierney Robertson thing largely comes down to the fact that those are the 2 players in the squad with the biggest reputations and the biggest transfer fees. It's not that they're always the 2 most informed players or the 2 best players in the squad, but there's almost a sense of obligation that because one plays for it, and McTominay almost gets it as well to a little bit, but because they play for Arsenal, they play for Liverpool, they play for United, they must play for Scotland. And it doesn't matter if they're playing garbage or not. And that's, for me, it's a big reason why we almost revel in failure now.
I think to bring it back to the goalkeeper, I think David Marshall will start, and I think it would be very harsh given the way he's played in the last year if he was to be dropped for this, regardless of what's that. I think the only exception you could make is if David Marshall had been basically on the bench for Derby, and he has played every week. So
it's been worse than that. He's been shipping goals every week. I mean, wait, let's just have a look at the Championship table, right? Because
Derby have not started the season well at all. I'm pretty sure the last time I checked, they were in the bottom. They were in the bottom 3.
Bottom 5 or 6 last I seen.
It's the bottom 3, and it's a bottom 3 as well that includes a Sheffield Wednesday team that had a large sum of points deducted off them at the start of this season, and who have now, since we recorded this, sacked their manager. I'm pretty sure Gary Monk.
Yeah, I sacked Gary Monk the other night. So I mean, it's Derby County. Let's see, Derby County. There we go. Derby County are sitting rock bottom of the championship as we record this. So, I mean, yeah, David Marshall's done well for Scotland in the past, but nah, come on, like there's got to be some consideration taken to club form as well. I mean, Steve Clarke insists that that's the thing. If you're not playing for your club, you're not in consideration.
I'm assuming this
Not
is
playing
for
well.
John McLaughlin to
No,
start.
no. It's more about Craig Gordon coming in, to be honest. Because the idea for me that Craig Gordon's going to come back in, it's laughable. It's seriously laughable. We've got a guy who got binned from Celtic over the summer because they've not exactly had a great time with goalkeepers recently, and he wasn't. They've kept Scott Bain, for Christ's sake.
To be fair to Gordon, Celtic did offer him to stay, albeit in a number 2 capacity, but he turned it down to go back and play.
That's because that's what he formed. That's why he's never a second-tier goalkeeper in Scottish football. That's his level.
I think that's harsh. I think Craig Gordon.
But is it?
I think Craig Gordon is a well-proven goalkeeper. David Marshall as well and John McLaughlin. I think the three of them, if no matter who came in, I think you would have a solid pair of hands, regardless of who came into that position. But
you would have a solid pair of hands if they're at their best. I just think that, given everything that Clarke tells us about form and consistency and performances, that it just doesn't ring true.
Does Lyndon start up front then because he hasn't scored for QPR?
Probably not.
Who would you start? Because Ollie McBurney's not scored for Sheffield United. Lawrence Shankland isn't scoring. Who do you start?
This is the problem with his squad. There's a centre forward in Scotland who is scoring goals, but again, he's not in the squad.
Yeah,
because
the one I actually quite like this squad. I think it's probably the strongest Scotland squad Scotland have had in a wee while. I'd say a blow. They've obviously lost Grant Hanley, who hasn't really been involved in squads recently. He was sort of brought there as a backup option for defence, but I think the big one in attack they've lost is Ryan Fraser. Now I know he's not been playing every week, but he started playing every week for Newcastle United. He's shown last time out he can be a really effective option with Dykes, and he's out. So I think that's a big blow in attack. But I think in terms of the 11, I don't think we'll see much changes from the 11 at all, if any, from last time out. I think he'll want to sort of keep that rhythm going, that form going of that core group. The only inclusion I think that will be brought back into it is Andy Robertson. Andy Robertson has to start because he's the captain.
Do you start Callum McGregor?
Probably. I think he just about nicks it.
Why?
Again, I think I watched him on Sunday during the Mull Celtic game, and whilst not at his best, he is a bit of a leader in that midfield. He's always a solid 6 or 7 out of 10 most weeks. But
right, so to go back to your logic on the goalkeepers, when did Callum McGregor last perform in a Scotland jersey?
Last month. The game again, what was the last game? The last game was Slovakia. I think totally ran himself into the ground. That one, him and Ryan Jack were really good, I thought, in that one.
Next one before that.
I mean, I'd argue that in the last internationals, you probably couldn't say a bad word about any of those Scotland players that played. And Callum McGregor played in most of them. I think the good thing is that we're having these discussions and that it's not like we're sitting here going, right, there is a solid 11 we need to play here. These are the 11 best players night and day. That squad, you could pretty much start most of them and they'd all be all right, I think, which is something Scotland haven't had to say in pretty much I started watching football, 2007, 2008, and that's the first time I think I've ever been able to say that about a Scotland squad, so aye. Whilst we're on it, who would you start? Who would be in your starting 11?
Right, my starting 11. Oh God. Goalkeeper with.
Well, I go first because I think I've got a solid team in my team. Well, team in my head.
The back four,
Is it a back four?
it's probably going to be a back three, but I would be going with a back four.
I don't think that's the worst option against Serbia because I think they are much better in attack. Attacking wise, they've got Tadic, Milinkovic, Savic. I know Luka Jovic hasn't really kicked into gear for Real Madrid at all since moving last summer, but a Real Madrid striker who scored 18 goals for Frankfurt isn't to be sniffed at, and Mitrovic as well. So,
as counterintuitive as it might be to say about a Scotland team or about a team under Steve Clarke, that 3-5-2 is not necessarily set up to be the most defensive. It tends to play the two wing backs tend to be used relatively attackingly, or attack mindedly. I don't know, but they're used offensively. That's what I'm looking for. Be it Robertson on one side, Forrest, Tierney, whoever. So actually, I think I've gone back to the four. Like I've had my say in the three already. I think the three's stupid for Scotland anyway. But I think going back to the four would very much suit this. It lets you be a bit more solid defensively. Pardon me. Unless you can have those two banks of four, your defence and your midfield, and just try and suffocate what Serbia's trying to do, because I do expect that they're going to see a lot of the ball and they're going to be making most of the attacking play. So it's going to be down to Scotland to try and grab something on the counter. So yeah, it's probably be tempted to go back to a four-man defence.
I think I was picking an 11 in terms of players I'd play. I would play a three simply not because I don't think the three's awful, but I think four perhaps in this instance would be better. But I think he'll play a three. I think
he will play a three.
That is the system come hell or high water. And I think Marshall's and goals. Same back three as last time. McTominay, Gallagher in the middle of it, and then Considine, then Palmer and Andy Robertson as right wing back and left wing back. I think those are the, even though Kieran Tierney's there, I think those are the guaranteed starters. It's midfield. I think Dykes is probably guaranteed to play up front, but it's sort of the middle for the three midfielders and then the one playing off Dykes. That is the problem positions in terms of their top.
I think he'll swap Andy Considine for Kieran Tierney. And he'll do that rotating thing with Tierney and Robertson. One's at centre back, one's at left wing back, and they two will flick through the game.
I think that's a possibility, but I'll be gutted for Andy Considine if that is the case, because for me, Kieran Tierney, obviously an amazing talent. He'll be a brilliant player for the national team for many years, but Andy Considine has proven last month, and he's played very well this season as well in club form, that he deserves to start that game for me. And I know Tierney is there's no denying Tierney's a better footballer than Andy Considine, but I think for the type of game this is, Andy Considine's better suited. And I know that sounds mental. Andy Considine's better suited to a game than Kieran Tierney, but I think Considine's a better option than Tierney this time.
I think the midfield, the centre three should pick itself. It won't, but it should. McGinn, Jack, and Armstrong.
Yeah, I think sure Armstrong's a big one. I think Callum McGregor or Ryan Jack. I don't think both of them start. I think one or the other starts.
I think for me, I think it needs to be Jack. I think
the only way you could see that is if Armstrong plays off Dykes.
I think you've seen in Europe Jack's much more suited to playing that role defensively. I think he's shown for Rangers that he's really suited to playing there when he's got two midfielders who are much more used to pushing on, making runs beyond the forwards. I don't think that suits McGregor. Scotland really need to have somebody that's there to anchor the midfield. I don't think it suits McGinn that much. I think McGinn's much better just having that freedom, just to kind of float around, pick out pockets of space. And then it kind of leaves Armstrong as your creative, kind of almost number 10 type. But yeah, for me, Ryan Jack has to start, because if you're going to play McTominay and set at centre back, you need to have an anchor in midfield. And Jack, for me, is the only one in the squad that's really properly capable of playing that game and not letting himself kind of get too distracted with trying to get forward.
No, I think that's fair enough. So I think we'll pretty much just wrap up just finally. What do you think? I'll plug in what do you think the score's going to be? Do you think we'll play at Euro 2020 next summer, or or not? I know you already sort of alluded to it in your opening remarks, but no.
I don't. The wait for a major tournament, I expect, shall continue for just another year. At least it's only going to be one.
I know we always say it. I know, especially people before my time as well, always say it. This is the squad that's going to get us to a major tournament. This is it. This is it. Say it after every single thing. And I think sometimes Scotland say it with a bit of like, it's almost like just covering up things like, oh, I will be fine, we'll be fine. When very clearly under Alex McLeish's second time round or under, I mean, I'm not old enough to remember the Bertie Vogts era, but even the Bertie Vogts era, I think it was probably much the same from what I hear from different people. 2000, I know it might sound odd to say that about Bertie Vogts. Perhaps you were better on that because they did actually get to a playoff final under him. But it's all
a better squad.
I'd say this time around,
comfortably better squad.
I think this time around, this squad is probably it's the closest they've obviously been since then. And I think in terms of a squad that's been equipped to deal with it, maybe in the last 15 years, this is probably the best equipped. It's the strongest Scotland squad, not just in starting 11, but in bench as well. There's actual options you can bring off the bench if things are going awry, both defensively to tighten things up or to mix it up going forward. And just in terms of Scottish football, I mean, my generation has never seen Scotland play in a major tournament. All we've known is, that game against Italy where it nearly happened, or defeats to Kazakhstan and things like that. And we've really known is glorious failure or just complete failure. There's never been any success. And I don't even think Scotland fans of my generation really care all that much about going too far into the Euros or whatever.
We've never got past the first round of a tournament when we've got there. Even when we were getting there, and I remember them because I actually got to see Scotland at a major finals, and we're garbage a lot of the time.
Oh, this round, I think back then that was seen as more of a failure because obviously Scotland getting to major tournaments was just a regular thing. It wasn't like it was expected almost. But now I think Scotland fans just want to see Scotland there, and if they get beat 3-0 in the first 3 games, then it's disappointing, but at least we were there for a change.
I remember watching Scotland get pumped by Morocco in France 98. Morocco.
We were speaking to Craig Brown about that, but weren't we? And he said about that game that the Moroccan team, now obviously I can't remember the game, but he said that team were actually okay, and obviously
they were a very good team with some really good players in it. Because they had like Noureddin Nabet, defender who played a lot. He was in Spain for a long time. A couple of other guys but they were a good side. But I mean, like they blitzed Scotland, and that was, you go back Euro '96, a draw with Holland, losing to England, and then Super's goal against Switzerland. And then before that, I don't know, I feel like I said, I read something the other day, I remember it might have been Henry Winter, talking about how tournaments miss the Tartan Army. I'm sorry. I have seen many World Cups, many European Championships, some with Scotland, some without Scotland, and never once have I sat and thought, do you know what, this needs to make it better? Some dickhead in a CU Jimmy hat, a kilt, and a pair of Timbies pissing against a statue.
Are you secretly from Sussex and we don't know it?
Oh, no. Born in Stirling, my friend.
Right.
Moments before Scotland played Ireland in a World Cup qualifier, the day Murdo McLeod made his Scotland debut.
Who?
Get lynched for that for some people.
Oh well, right, we'll leave it there before you dampen my mood any further and I get lynched off certain people for Murdo McLeod gestures. So thanks for watching. Hopefully it is a positive result for the national team. It would be a big lift for the country. I think that's something that probably shouldn't go underestimated, that this has been an utterly tragic year for everybody involved, both in Scotland and around the world. But if the national team, well, in fact, before I do wrap this up, and I think you might have seen this because this was an interesting point that was brought up right on Twitter, and I seen it getting debated all throughout yesterday. Right, Scotland have never been to a major tournament in 22 years, is the narrative that's getting bandied about. But I have seen from some quarters bring up the fact that perhaps that's not bringing into account the achievements of the women's team a couple of years ago who did reach the World Cup.
Yep.
And saying that it's perhaps not fair to say Scotland haven't reached a major tournament for 22 years. What do you think about that? Do you think that is fair?
It's a weird one because, right, I completely understand the point. However, if I say to you, who played in the World Cup final? What's your first thought?
Who played in the World
Cup? Who played it in the last World Cup final?
Who did play in the last World Cup final? Oh, fuck, who did play in the last World Cup final? Let's just say it was Germany and Argentina. That's the last one I can remember.
France v Croatia.
Right. Oh, I saw it was.
The men's World Cup. Who played in the Champions League final last season?
That would be Bayern Munich versus PSG. I wasn't expecting a pub quiz, but here we go.
The men's Champions League.
Yeah, well,
now this is it's not a sexist thing that people go, the team haven't qualified for a major final for 22 years. It's just this thing where, particularly in the UK and Europe to an extent, women's football is very much a new-ish thing. I know it's been around for a long time, but it's only just come to any kind of real mainstream prominence. You go to America, it's totally different. The Yanks they go crazy for women's soccer. They love it over there, man. Some of the women's team outdraw some of the men's teams in some cases, and the women's team regularly do far better than the male team. But it's just this thing. It's the natural kind of association we make with the World Cup. It's the men's World Cup. When we talk about the Scotland team, the natural association we make is the men's national team. In time, as the women's team gains more popularity, more exposure, and just kind of becomes more well known, that will change. But it's nobody's trying to talk them down or do them a disservice or anything else by saying we've not qualified for a tournament for 22 years. It's just the kind of context that it's been discussed in, because we know that when we're talking about the Scotland team not getting to tournaments, we know we're talking about the men's team.
Cool. Right. Just wrap this up now and see if we can get to the end of it. As I was saying before, went off in that tangent. It has been a terrible year for Scottish people. We're still in the midst of this lockdown stuff, and hopefully with this vaccine news that's came out in the last sort of week or so, there's perhaps some sort of hope that there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not exactly going to be next week or tomorrow or things like that. So I think a victory for the national team in a year that's been utterly tragic would just lift at least the footballing nation's spirits a bit. It probably puts the domestic scene on a slightly bigger platform. We've seen that wee bit of a boost for the women's game when they qualified for the women's World Cup, that the women's domestic scene did take a wee bit of an upturn for that season. So who knows whether the same would happen with SPFL football in the men's game. But hopefully a positive result. I'm going to go for I'll go with 1-0 again, because that's the way Scotland seem to be winning games now. And I'll be slightly optimistic, but obviously we want to be cautious. But I mean, it would be an absolutely huge victory for Scottish football. The biggest game, I think Declan Gallagher at the start of this video said it's probably the biggest game that he's going to play. Guys like him, Andy Considine, even though Andy Robertson and things like that are used to the Champions League finals, these big massive games, Liverpool, Manchester United, there's some players in that squad as well who might never get this type of opportunity again. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes well for everyone involved. But if you do like this video, drop a like on it and subscribe to our channel. We'll have an instant reaction to the game on Thursday night, roughly fairly soon after full time, regardless of result. I'm sure James will be in a positive mood regardless of the outcome of that one.
Let's go live. Let's go live after full time.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what mood we're in after that.
Drag me away for Football Manager.
Do remember to subscribe, like the video, and until next time, take it easy.